Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round one coverage of the 2015 Women's World Championship taking place in Sochi, Russia. So the Women's World Championship this year has an interesting format. It's a 64-player knockout tournament, actually the same format as the basketball tournament that's going on in the U.S. Right now. So each round, half the players are eliminated, and a round consists of 3 days. In the first 2 days, they play one classical time control game each day, first with the white pieces and then with the black pieces, so that both players have a chance with the white pieces. And then if it's still tied after 2 days, they go into a tiebreak day where they play first rapid games, then blitz games, and finally an Armageddon game if it's not yet settled, to resolve a winner, to produce a winner. So round one has finished, and as you would expect, like in the basketball tournament, the first round there's a lot of mismatches because of the way the players are seated. So the top players came through pretty well. The top 5 players all made it through to the second round. I'll go ahead and give you their names so you have an idea of who's playing. We have in the number 1 position, we have Humpy Canero from India, followed by Wenjin Ju from China, Anna Muzicek from the Ukraine, Victoria Kamilite from Lithuania, and Alexandra Kosteniuk from Russia. So those 5 players, the top 5 in the tournament, all made it safely through to round 2. I'll give you some more updates on the tournament, individual players, after this game, but I chose one game from quite a few games, obviously, that were played in the round 1. I thought this was pretty interesting. We have, with the white pieces, Yaniet Marrero Lopez and from Cuba, and with the black pieces, we have Elina Danielian from Armenia. So Yaniet kicks off with e4, and Elina plays c6. We get the Karo-Cann, d4, d5. And now Yaniet chooses to play e5, the advanced variation. This is really popular among top players these days. It used to be the main line was knight c3, and that was pretty much all you saw. But Nigel Short came up with this idea of just playing the advanced variation with the very simple development plan of bringing his knight out and bringing his bishop out and castling quickly, and then just playing with that space edge that you have in the Karo-Cann. And he was quite successful with it, so he really revived that line. I mean, it existed already, but he was the one who proved that it could be successful at the top levels, and the other players started playing it. We get a variation of that in this game. So first, the bishop comes out. Now, the black player is looking to play something like a French defense. So the idea is e6 is going to be played to create this typical pawn structure you get in the French defense, and then later c5 is going to be played to undermine the center. But one thing that's different, there's 2 things that's different. One is that the black player has managed to get the light-squared bishop outside the pawn chain, whereas often in the French defense it's locked behind the pawn chain. But she has to take an extra move here to get in the pawn break c5. The typical pawn break of c5 in the French defense usually occurs in a single move because the pawn will go from c7 to c5 in one move. So it's a bit slower, but black gets the advantage of having better pieces. So that's the trade-off you get. Now the way Yaniet plays this is different than the short system. She starts with knight d2. It's sort of a variation. I've seen it in other games too, so this is not an innovation at this point, but just a different way of playing it. And it's pretty logical. It's just aiming directly at the c5 square. The knight is going to come to b3 and just try and clamp down on this move c5. So black continues with e6. And now the knight goes to b3, as predicted. Elina continues developing with knight d7, knight f3, and knight e7. So all this is pretty standard. There are other ways to develop the pieces, but this is not at all unusual. And now there is a choice here. The top 2 moves are both pretty funny. Well, I can't say both of them. h6 is a move that has some logic. The idea is that the black player wants to be able to retreat the bishop if it gets harassed by the knight. So, but the other move I don't quite understand entirely, but it's one of the top choices in the opening book. It's knight to c8. I guess, well, here's some points. It is opening up the bishop onto the c5 square, so it helps get in this pawn push to c5, which is part of black's strategy. And then maybe the knight has some job over here on the queen side, some role it can usefully perform. So white continues with her plan of just castling. Bishop e7. And now the first kind of interesting move. Bishop e3 is the most common move here, but a4, it's another move that's been played before, but we're getting into somewhat rare territory. But an interesting idea. Maybe first it may be attempting to cramp the queen side, and secondly it may be trying to discourage the knight from coming to b6. Black goes ahead and castles at this point, and now the pawn just pushes on to a5. And Elina plays a6 to stop it. And we get bishop e3, so finally completing the development. And now this knight doesn't seem to have many prospects. It can't go to d6 and it can't go to b6, so it goes over to a7. Maybe it can get back into the game via the the b5 square. But white starts out on a plan of development here. And this is an unusual plan. It's been seen before. The top choice, though, is actually the move c4 here. So white getting in the move c4 before black gets in the move c4. That's probably a fine way to play. So this move is a bit provocative, knight e1. But we'll see that Yaniet has an idea here, which is kind of interesting. And it comes up pretty shortly. So first of all, Elina has the chance to get in the c5 break, and she goes for it, c5. And now knight takes c5. And there's two ways to take the pawn. So the way that was played in the game was bishop takes c5. And after that, black gets in a little bit of trouble. So you have to look at the other way of taking. There's knight takes c5. And then after pawn takes, the bishop can't take back right away. It's defended. But there's the move knight to c6, which forks these two pawns. And then white most likely will try and hold on to the e-pawn with a move like f4. And then it also says bishop d3 could be played here. And then the knight will grab one of those pawns. So that's a way to play it. Maybe a little better than what Elina selected. Elina selected the interesting move, bishop takes. And this gets the pawn back immediately, because after bishop takes, pawn takes, the knight on d7 can take the pawn on e5. And it grabs a center pawn. So, I mean, I think on the surface, this looks like the best way to play. You get a pawn back, and you're guaranteed to get that center pawn. But there's a very unusual reply from Yaniet here, and also a top engine choice. So, this is an interesting point where actually she had to calculate pretty deeply right here to verify this move was safe, and everything worked out okay. So if you want a chance to pause the video and see if you can find a really unusual move from white here, which turns out to be pretty good. Okay, Yaniet played the move g4, kicking the bishop and gaining space on the king side. But you really have to wonder, is it safe to create these pawn weaknesses on the queen side when there's, on the king side, around the king, while there's still queens on the board? But you see we get into a sequence which is pretty forced. So the bishop drops back to g6. The pawn goes to f4, kicking the knight. Knight goes to c4, which is the best square for it. Where else could it go? I guess it could drop back to c6, but that's pretty dubious because it's blocking the other knight now. Anyway, yeah, the chess engine agrees this is still the best move for black, developing at c4. That provokes this exchange. And then now not taking queens off right away, but pushing on with f5 first. So the interesting thing about it is that after this exchange, His bishop has no squares. And so what this means is the exchange of queens is forced. Black needs to take the queen off so that she doesn't lose the bishop. So rook takes d1 and bishop to h5. So this is a sequence that had to be calculated. I guess I can throw in one more move. The rook comes down to d7 because the rook was under attack now. So now we've reached a situation where it's stable, and this is the position that had to have been foreseen before playing that move g4. Because if black had a good way of keeping the queens on, then this would be a really dangerous position for white. So so she had to foresee that that sequence would occur and that the queens would come off and that the king would be relatively safe. Even so, you have to ask yourself, would you go for a position like this? I mean, it's true that the king is not going to come over under an immediate mating attack, but look at the pawns. The pawns are just scattered all over the board. And surely the black player would have some way of taking advantage of all of these weaknesses. But in addition to weaknesses, there's also strengths. And pay particular attention to the c-pawn here, which has bypassed its competitor. The pawn that might be blocking it is behind it and has a straight line to the goal, with the only pawn in the way being this b-pawn here. And also notice the c-pawn is well supported by the bishop. And, well, it looks like white has also taken advantage of the fact that black's pieces are momentarily in a bit of disarray. This knight was sitting over here on a7 through that whole sequence, and so maybe black is also looking forward to just being able to activate her pieces more quickly. Okay, but it's in this position, it's black's turn to move. Rook f to e8 was played, which is interestingly a top choice. I would think, you might be interested in defending the b-pawn after I just pointed out that the c-pawn is nearly a passer. But both players ignore the b-pawn for a bit. Let's check something out. If black just plays a defensive move here, I guess that can't be defended. The problem is bishop f4 is going to chase the rook away. Okay, so that's not a good idea. So rook f e8 was played. And now I don't understand. White did not take here right away. Maybe there's a more active move to be played. Knight to g2, also the top choice of the engine. So let's back up and ask the question once again. Why doesn't white just grab this pawn right away? Rook takes... Oh, the bishop is hanging. I'm sorry. That's why rook e8 is a good move. It's hitting the bishop. So knight g2. Defending the bishop. Now I understand. I was just a bit confused about what was going on there. So knight to c6. I guess the other point is that there was no good way to defend b7. So b7 is lost here. And the knight, though, is attacking the pawn on a4. And once again, an unusual move is played here. Well, not unusual. It's actually a good move. Knight to e5. But you have to ask yourself, why not take the pawn? And this is something I did look at earlier. If you play that move, knight takes a5 to grab a pawn, white plays the move rook c7, just guarding these squares where the knight would get back into the game. And this turns out to be good for white. It keeps this knight on the side of the board for a few more moves, and the White's pieces are active, and the game continues. So it's interesting. This turns out to be good for white. I guess the idea is just play against this this piece on the side, maybe attack some pawns, and try and round up some material here. Anyway, good for white. So this move knight e5 is a reasonable alternative, getting the knight into the game, and these weaknesses aren't going away. These weak pawns are going to sit here. There's no easy way to defend that a pawn. The b pawn can't go to b4 without being taken en passant, for example. So the weaknesses aren't going away. Anyway, bishop to f4 was played here, kicking the knight. The knight goes to f3, check. King comes forward to f2. So we're late enough in the game that it's not so unsafe. There is quite a bit of material. But yeah, white is playing this like an endgame. I was going to say, this actually violates the rule of 14, because if you count the force, there's 10 points for the rooks and 6 points for the minor pieces. So there's a total of 16 points of force on the board. The rule of 14 is that when there's 14 points of force on the board or less, then it's generally safe for your king to come out and start playing. So that's when you start playing like the endgame. But, well, the king was forced to move anyway. So after king f2, g5, maybe hoping to kick the pieces around. It's interesting, if g5 is not played, white has the move f6 to bust up the pawn structure. So black's pawns are going to get fragmented a bit anyway. But g5 is maybe a little bit convenient, because this helps white by creating some weaknesses. So f takes g6 is played. It gets rid of one of white's weaknesses, I guess, is the better way to look at it. And now h takes g6. Didn't really create new weaknesses because these pawns are still together. But there is a bit of a target here. We'll see if this plays a role later in the game. h4 was played, getting this pawn to a square where it's protected by the knight, and now the bishop is free to move. And now knight to d4. The knight reroutes and attacks the c-pawn. And knight to e3 was played, attacking black's c-pawn. So rook to e4, bringing the rook in, attacking the bishop, and rook to b8 check. So that is dealing with this threat on the bishop, because it provokes this exchange. It's forced, and now the bishop goes to b8. So now the king really is safe and can start playing a role in the game, and black's king is a little bit out of the picture, and this passed pawn is looking more ominous all the time. So it's interesting. The chess engine still gives only a slight edge to white. It's not like white has been winning this whole time, but gradually as the game goes on, white's edge increases, and I think it's because this pawn is just hard to eliminate, and it remains here as a threat hanging over black's head throughout the game. So rook takes h4, at least she can grab a pawn here. And now knight to d5. Knight to c6, kicking the bishop. Bishop drops back to f4. And notice the knight on d4 defends the bishop there. King comes forward to g7, maybe trying to guard some of these dark squares, keep the bishop from invading. There is a threat in this kind of configuration. There's always the threat of the bishop coming to h6 and the rook coming to e8, delivering a checkmate. I guess it's not quite checkmate because the king has the h7 square, but you do have to be careful. The knight can come into f6 too. So good preventative move here. King g7 covering some of these dark squares. Rook to e1, getting on an active file. And now rook to g4. And this move here is actually the first time the chess engine starts to give a significant edge to white in the game. So bishop to g4 is the recommended move. Even this leaves white with somewhat of an edge. But I just wanted to comment that at this point, we're on move 33, so the game has been going on for quite a while, and one of the things about this position is that I think it's really difficult to play. It's not a typical kind of position where players have some idea already in mind of what the strategy is. They really have to make it up as they go along. Nobody studies positions like this. And so that requires time. It burns time on the clock, and as the game goes on and the position stays complicated, it's more difficult to defend than it is to attack, and the black player is clearly on the defensive here, and so it's entirely understandable if she's burning more time on the clock, and so what happens is your moves become somewhat less precise. It's just really difficult to calculate all the variations out correctly. So rook g4 is the first actual mistake. In spite of that, black has been under pressure all this time, but this is the first real slip. So rook to e8, activating the rook, and now g5, kicking the bishop. That was probably the idea, with rook to g4 supporting this pawn. The bishop just drops back to d2, and now f6. So these pawns have advanced. But this pawn is on a dark square, and rook to e6 puts some pressure on it immediately. Now the knight... Well, let's see. Rook to d4 was played first, not moving the knight, but counterattacking the bishop. The bishop goes to c3, which is a good square. Looking at this f6 pawn through the rook. So there's a tactical sequence here. It looks like black might be losing material, but she calculated this part out. Rook takes d5, and now that's rook takes c6. So there's just an exchange of knights there, and rook to f5 check, defending the pawn. So the king goes to g3, and still it's not clear. The engine is giving a strong advantage to white at this point, I guess based on this advanced passed pawn. If you just count the pawns, it's even. And even in fact, black is the only player that has the connected passed pawns, which are normally quite a strength. But it's just going to take a long time for them to get going. And white's king is ideally placed to stop the pawns from going, whereas this pawn on c5 here is just ready to run. So king g6 was played, and now rook takes a6, and rook to f3 was played here. Let's see, there must be a trick. Is there a reason why the rook doesn't just take this pawn? Oh, I know, there's a threat. There is a threat here on I'll go ahead and put it on. There's just this threat on the f6 pawn. So black needs to stay defending the pawn. So rook to f3 check, defended by the bishop. And now, let's see, the king drops back to g2, so that was good, making some space and maybe hoping to get these pawns rolling. Rook to f5. Sorry, it's black's turn. Rook to f5. Cancel that. Back here. Okay, taking a look at these pawns. c6. Now the c pawn starts rolling. Bishop to f3 check was played. The king goes all the way back to g1. So black has been successful in pushing the king back. But notice white king stays in front of the black pawn, so it's going to be in a position to stop them. And now rook to c5, getting behind white's pawn here. But c7 is played anyway, and this interesting tactic here, taking advantage of the attack on the f6 pawn. So if the rook grabs the pawn here, then rook takes here will check and win the bishop sitting on f3. So you can't play rook takes c7. g4 was played here, defending the bishop and now threatening to take the pawn. So now rook takes f6 is played anyway. King goes to g5, still keeping one pawn alive, and with it her hopes. And now the rook drops back to f7. So a very neat sequence where this pawn appeared to be hanging for a while, but it was defended by tactical means, by the threat of the taking on f6 and then dropping back to f7 to protect it. So bishop b7 covering the queening square, and now the king can come forward, king to f2. This is actually would allow the move rook f5, but I think rook f5 might have been something to try here, because if you look at this, this may be a position where black could go for pawns of opposite color. So bishops of opposite color endgame. So rook to f5 check was not played, but this might have been black's best chance. So this would force an exchange, and it looks like a really horrible endgame for white, with 4 pawns against 2, and the king in position to stop this. But the bishops are of opposite color, and it may have been an opportunity for black to try and play for a draw. The engine rates this as in favor of white, but the evaluation is not going up. which is a bad sign. If it just stays fixed at 1.5 points where it is, that means it doesn't see a breakthrough. It doesn't see any way for those pawns to make a queen. And if the pawns can't be forced through, if this bishop and king can stop all of these pawns, it may be that black can just give up this pawn entirely, bring the king over here, and just blockade the remaining pawns with the bishop and king. The king is going to be pretty quick to get to this pawn, so that can be defended, and the bishop can blockade these pawns on the dark squares. So it is possible this is a draw. There was a different move. Instead of king f2 to allow that, the king could have come up to h2. That would have been another way to play this, and a bit safer. Anyway, king f2 was played, and the rook check was not played, but king g6. And after this, I think it's all downhill. There's no good way to stop things. So the rook check, defended by the bishop there. King comes forward, and now the other pawn, that was the point of the rook check, was defending the other pawn, hitting the bishop. The bishop moves out of the way. The rook comes over to harass the bishop, and also, once again, preventing rook takes c7, because that would win the bishop here. And bishop to e4. Cancel that. Bishop to e4 is played, getting out of the glare of the rook. And now rook to e6. Hitting the bishop again. And king to f4. I'm sorry, king to f4, defending the bishop. Now bishop to d2 check. King goes to f5, still holding on to the bishop. Rook to e7. Now defending, finally defending the pawn again. c3 was played. Bishop takes. Rook to c4. And rook takes e4 was played here. And white resigned. I mean, black resigned, so white won this game. So the rook can't be taken by the rook because this pawn would queen. If the king takes, then we have the move a7, and you can't stop both pawns from queening. So it was just game over, that final touch of sacrificing the exchange, and prevents black from stopping at least one of those pawns from queening. So in this position, after rook c4, rook takes e4, black resigned. So an interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, I was going to give some more commentary. So this game was one of the upsets. So Yaniet Marrero Lopez has a FIDE rating of 23-22, and her opponent, Elina Danielian, has a FIDE rating of 24-88. But after winning this game, Yaniet drew the second game, and so she survived the first round and will compete in round two. Other players that survived, there's Irina Krush from the United States survived, and so she will also compete in round two. Two other players from the U.S. were in the tournament, Kamila Baginskite and Tatev Abrahamian, but they were both eliminated in the first round, along with Yuanling Yuan from Canada. She had a good first pair of games, but she got eliminated in the rapid games. And also Elizabeth Pitts from Germany. Pitts from Germany actually was eliminated in an upset. So yeah, so that's it for my coverage of round one. I'll be back in about 3 days. Like I said, the rounds take 3 days. So every 3 days there'll be a new video giving an update on what happened in that round and selecting a game of the round to show you guys. Okay, see you. Bye.